To introduce our final speaker, I'd like to introduce my colleague in African American Studies and a professor of sociology, Dr. Saida Grundy.
Thank you all as I pull up my notes here. Yes, here we go. Sorry. Yes, so thank you all for being here, and it's a pleasure to introduce our keynote today. I think just a moment ago I heard a great descriptor of you, and he said, "Oh, she's a tour de force, right? She's a tour de force, right?" And I thought, "Oh, this is very apropos, right?" And I'm glad that we have Black feminist voices in these public spaces that do exactly that. So Feminista Jones is a social worker, a sex-positive feminist writer, public speaker, and community activist currently residing in Philadelphia. She is an award-winning blogger and the author of a popular novel, Push the Button. Her work centers Black American culture, critical race theory, intersectionality, women's health and well-being, specifically in areas of mental and sexual health. Feminista has been featured in several publications, notably as a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, Ebony, Time, Essence, and She Knows. Jones has been regularly featured on Huffington Post Live and has appeared on C-SPAN and MSNBC. In 2013, Feminista was selected as a United Nations Fellow for her dynamic social media influence. In 2014, she launched a global anti-street harassment campaign, You OK Sis, which I remember well, and a national moment of silence protesting police brutality, hashtag NMOS14, both of which received international media attention. For this work, she was awarded the 2014 Black Weblog Award for Outstanding Online Activism, and she was honored as one of the top 100 Black social influencers by The Root. Feminista has presented and lectured at various conferences and universities, including Princeton, Dartmouth, Cornell, Columbia, UC Berkeley, and the University of Pennsylvania, and we'll edit this for Boston University. In 2015, she co-founded and served as general director of the Women's Freedom Conference, the first all-digital conference completely organized by and featuring only women of color. For her work, she was named one of She Knows BlogHer's 2015 Voices of the Year. Feminista's latest work is Witness to Hunger, an anti-poverty, anti-hunger national advocacy program that amplifies the voices and experiences of people living in poverty and facing hunger. Feminista is also a mom, a mentor to young girls and women, and an outspoken advocate for the homeless, people living in poverty, and those living with psychiatric disabilities. It's my pleasure to welcome her to the stage.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Do y'all know who that is? She just introduced me. That's so awesome. Oh, thank you. I don't have PowerPoint. I'm not that cool. All right. Here we go. Hey. All right. Okay, so I've been asked to talk a little bit about my experiences kind of being Twitter famous and what that means, right? I hate that term. So I'm just gonna put that out there, like, people will say, "Oh, you're like a Twitter celebrity," and I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm just awesome in general." No, okay. So I'm gonna try to be a little more academic because, like, I'm in the academic space, and all these like amazing doctors just came up and were just like all this great data and all this other stuff, and I'm like, that's great. I live this stuff, so let me talk a little bit about it from that side. And I really, really, really appreciate like every single thing that's been said. I'm like, this is the work that we need. This is the research that we need to really back up these experiences. We log on every day, but there's really some things happening, and I just want to shout out Meredith Clark, also who has done a lot of work on Black Twitter. I want to just thank anybody who is willing to look at how race and gender, influence how we are seeing this development of social media. And I'm thankful to be here because I think that I am one of those people that has helped make it flourish. So my name is Feminista Jones. That is the name that I have trademarked and I use for myself. And we do a lot of talk about what we think of in Kwanzaa as kujichagulia. It's self-identification, how you name yourself and the respect for that. And particularly as we look at the social media space and we're talking about people being anonymous, but I think there's also a great benefit in people being able to choose their names, particularly if we think historically about Black people being stripped of their names. And so to be able to choose one for yourself is definitely affirming. And so I chose the name Feminista Jones for several reasons, but mainly I tell everybody that it's because I love the Black exploitation era of the genre of films, and I think of Cleopatra Jones, who is Sister Dobson, was 6'2". I'm also tall, and I just thought she was totally badass. I mean, have you seen the movies? Come on, they're great. And they caught a lot of flack, but I also wrote a great paper for Donald Bogle about how Foxy Brown was an agent of Black feminism, and he gave me an A- because it was late. So hey, I might be onto something. I want to thank the African American Studies program here because I was an African American Studies major in undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania when it was a program, and we were just talking about like the work that goes into making these departments and what you have to do to prove that your area of study is important. So I'm always trying to support African American Studies programs. I encourage everybody to study your own people, and I think we take that for granted sometimes. We come to college and we think, oh, I'm Black, I know everything. No, you don't. No, you don't. Because you still believe that George Washington Carver created peanut butter. So no, you don't know everything, right? Because he didn't. 200 uses of the peanut, but we think that he created peanut butter. It's reductive at best. We called it chocolate studies. So we had shirts made. See, that's the thing about Black folks. Like, we come together in our spaces and we make them our own. And so at an Ivy League university, we dubbed our program Chocolate Studies, and that was empowering for us. I think that this is a pretty great symposium, and it's a reminder that we must always kind of consider the impact of race and gender on everything. And just outside, I was talking about how we cannot talk about race, especially as it relates to Black people, without talking about gender. You cannot. Like, the experiences of Black women are so unique in this world that there is no discussion of Blackness and Black liberation and Black community without talking about Black womanhood. So I'm going to bring that here in this discussion. I think we're in this age of wokeness, right? How many of you think you're woke? By show of hands. None of you are woke. You're all on Ambien. Okay, great. Awesome. And kind of thinking about what does it mean to be woke, right? So I think the young people, and I'm an older Gen Xer, so I'm not going to speak for the young people, but I think it means to them that they are intellectually enlightened, right? That they are thinking about things differently than what they're being fed. They're learning a lot about, oh, I didn't learn this in school, and I'm learning it now, and I feel like I'm waking up. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think the commodification of wokeness is becoming an issue, and it's being promoted as a product. And I think we have to be mindful of that, because we don't want to discourage that enlightenment. We don't want to discourage that pursuit of knowledge, but we also don't want to turn it into some trend that'll be discarded within a few years when it stops being a cute t-shirt slogan, right? Like my Asada thing, which I know a millennial made this, but it's awesome, because Asada has been locked up since before they were born. I mean, well, she's been in exile, but you know what I mean, so it's cool. There's some coolness in there. Okay, so a little bit how it got started. I think one of the most important things we have to think about when we're discussing these kinds of issues is, and particularly with social media, is that everybody is a human being for the most part. I know there was a discussion about bots and things like that, but for the most part, we're all human beings. And I really, really, really appreciate the discussion on how people become meaner, basically, behind the screen of social media and these devices. And that's why I asked the question about youth, because I know in my studies that the mobility aspect is skews younger, and it's like, so, okay, where are these young people getting it? And I know, like, I'll have young people be like, bitch, da-da-da-da-da, and I'm like, wait, why'd you call me? Like, I don't know you like that. Like, why'd you call me that? But for them, it's nothing. It's just how they talk, right? Bitch has become synonymous with woman. So it's like even digging a little bit deeper than that, right? So when we're looking at that data, we have to consider those things. But there's still humanity there. And I think we lose that sometimes because we make the people we encounter on social media into products for us to consume. You know, if you look at Trudy Hamilton, she tweets under the truths, she often talks about this idea of us being a product, a race portal, a fact portal, that people come to us because they want to be educated about something. And in part, that's because we have done a lot of time, spent a lot of time educating. But people come and they have these expectations of what we're supposed to produce. So I always like to talk about remembering the humanity of this work that we do. And once we start to forget that the people we are sending those ads to or that we're posting on Facebook are human beings, we begin to lose the power that we have, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Some of us began developing our identities before any of this existed. And I think we're beginning to engage people whose identity does not exist without these digital platforms. And so how do we connect and how do we have these conversations? It's like, this hybrid of analog and digital lives, and that's me. And it's like, you gotta think about it, like, I remember when we had rotary phones, and I remember winding up my cassette with a big pen, and I'll tell that to a young person, and they're like, okay, sure, old lady. And I'm like, but you don't know what it's like to run to Sam Goody on a Tuesday for a cassingle. Like, you don't know that life. I remember that, and I'm gonna hold that for the relic that it is, But you get me, Sam Goody, like, come on. Like, that was the life, and it's like, I don't wanna let that go, but at the same time, I'm also trying to work with, influence, build coalitions with young people who, WYD that's how they ask how you're doing. What are you doing? What are you doing? How you doing? And it took me a while. I was like, what does WID mean? What does it mean? Like, IKR, like, oh, what? So having to adapt to that, but also understanding they're still humans even if they use this truncated language, right? And I think about us as a sidebar, it's like, if anybody knows how to create language, it's Black folks, right? And like, when we see ourselves being like, conversate's not a word, yes it is. Yes it is. Why are we denying the use of conversate, as popular as it is in Black English vernacular? Why are we chastising people for using it? We're allowed to create words. We created aight, right? People use aight. What's wrong with that, right? So when we're looking at this digital creation of language, and we're seeing that it skews younger, it skews African American, it skews urban, what are we learning? It's young Black kids creating new language in digital spaces. And so here we come pointing our fingers. We have to be mindful of that. I'm thinking about, when I started, I wanted to be a writer since I was like 6. Like, I wrote my first story when I was 6, and I'm 38. So we're talking 32 years ago, I knew that I wanted to tell stories. I also knew I wanted to help people. I was born in poverty. I grew up with some struggles. My mom and my dad, okay. But, we made it. We did what we could. We survived, and we're here. But I always felt committed to giving back. And so before any of this stuff existed, before you could do *67 on your phone, see, some of you don't even know what that is, but before we had caller ID, before you knew who was calling you on the phone, there were a lot of us that were working to really try to change things and to try to do things differently. And so the advent of social media and these types of digital platforms really made things easier for us. And it's why some of us are resentful at being called like Twitter celebrities. Because it's like, I'm not looking to be a celebrity. I'm looking to use this as a tool to further this work that I've already been doing. I was writing at 6. My first story was about an HIV-positive princess who decided she wasn't going to get married to the prince. She was going to help people that were living with AIDS. Why? My mom was an AIDS activist in the 80s. And she took me places, and she took me to meet her, positive friends. She took me to rallies. She took me to parties. I learned a lot about the things that men could do on the floor with their knees bent back. I learned all about that, and I thought it was all amazing, but it really influenced my desire to want to help those people that were, really marginalized and disenfranchised before I learned what those words were. My goal was also to travel the world and write books and have a lover in every continent. That's what I was gonna do. I knew this. Like in high school, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna write books. I'm gonna write a different book in every continent. I'm gonna have a different lover, and that lover's gonna influence my writing, and I'm gonna be a great writer, and they're gonna know my name. Fame. Who remembers Fame? Yeah, it's okay. My mom, you know, I talk a lot about her. It's funny, her birthday just passed. My mother passed away from pancreatic cancer some years ago. And her birthday just passed. And I really became reflective on how much of an influence she had on my activism. And what would she be thinking about right now, like looking at me? And she would tell me to stop telling everybody my business. She would tell me to why are you telling all these people your business? They don't need to know all of this. And it makes me think about like where we've gotten into this space where we are sharing so much of ourselves, hoping that people remember that we're human beings, but not realizing that it is turning us into products, right? And we have to be kind of mindful. I remember being an undergrad. I went to the University of Pennsylvania undergrad. And let me tell you about Judith Rodin. Bless her heart. One year for Kwanzaa, she opened up, for the holidays, she opened up her house, and she had a Kwanzaa tree with little black figurines hanging from a Kwanzaa tree. How many people knew there were trees in Kwanzaa celebrations? I didn't. We were all like, are you kidding me? And on top of some other things that were going on, we began to protest some of the things that we started to see there that were happening at the University of Pennsylvania. And we were met with resistance, of course, because people were like, you get to go to an Ivy League school, what do you have to complain about? But we knew that things were not right, like people were being mistreated. And this is around a time where, you know, the affirmative action debate had, come back into light, and we were doing a lot of protest around that. Freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal was a big thing back then. I really cut my teeth on that. And that was when I really started kicking into this activism, this idea that there's more that I could be doing to help improve the lives of people who are like me, people that I grew up around, et cetera. And here I am at this school with all these resources, I might as well start using them. And then that's when I became really involved in activism. And that's also when I learned about hypervisibility and what it means. I started being featured in newspapers. And when you're featured in newspapers, people can find you. And when they find you, they can reach out to you and say whatever it is they want to say. They can say, wow, that was great, I really loved it. Or they could say, I hope you die, bitch. I hope you get lynched. I hope you get raped. And that started back then. This was before social media. So already I was plugged into this idea that when you stand up for something and when you put yourself into the public, you're going to face, whatever backlash comes with it, and are you ready to deal with that? So, going on social media, imagining like the explosion of that and what that did. And I definitely want to make sure that I talk about, hypervisibility. But I just want to, kind of I'm giving you a little bit of background on how I got to be here. I started like really, really blogging in 2004, but before that, I was on things like Black Planet, which awesome. Who remembers Black Planet? I know y'all do. Look at y'all, see y'all. Every time I mention something, it's like, yeah, I remember that. Like I started building like some popularity around then too. A lot of it I think is kind of my personality. But the other part of it is I would talk about like fun stuff. I would create conversations. I love to just chat stuff up. Stuff would happen in the news. You bring it to the chat room. That's how we did these things. You go to the message board. Somebody would post about an article. That was like social media. That was how we communicated and built with people around the world back then. And so we were doing that, and then I got into blogging, and I started at around 2004 was when I really started blogging. And I started, building community there. Some of those people I'm still connected to now. We follow each other on Twitter and things like that. So we're talking years of these kinds of connections. But that growth really came from me being unafraid to say what was on my mind and people wanting to read it because in it they saw something they were connected to. And they were like, wow, this person is putting into words these things that I've been feeling. And now we started seeing that in different spaces, right? So a lot of us that wanted to be writers but didn't have book deals, we're not journalists, we're not connected to that media, that legacy media that was spoken about earlier, now had platforms for people to read what we were writing, and it didn't have to go through anyone's approval but ours. That was a game changer, particularly for people who were in activist circles but didn't necessarily feel like the only method was to be in a street, in a rally, but that you could have your activism through what you were writing. The ways in which you were commentating, the commentary you were providing on what you were, experiencing really was active, still is, still very much a powerful form of activism. But that's where I cut my teeth with that. And so as the new platforms came, I moved from one to the other, like we all did. You know, your connections, your networks grew, and we were on things like Multiply and Friendster and College Club and like all these different things, Black Planet. We moved into serious blogging, and then Facebook, you know, I got on Facebook, I think, in 2004 as well. I was an early user. And then Twitter. And then Twitter came along. The only reason I wanted to be on Twitter is because I wanted to tweet Questlove from The Roots. Real talk. I was like, I don't know what this is, but Questlove is on there, and he's sharing his thoughts in real time. I want to be there because I'm a hip-hop head. I was like, there's other hip-hoppers on here. And Britney Spears. She's dope, though. Don't listen. You got to listen to Slave by, I'm a Slave. Okay, Britney Spears. So I got on Twitter. And it's funny because it was right after my divorce. And my first tweet is actually ... recovering. I thought I found a private space where I could talk about my divorce, where my ex-husband couldn't see it because he was connected to everything else, and I could just talk shit. No. Private space, irony now, here I am, right? But no, it's really interesting because, you know, some of my friends were on it. I wasn't really using it much. But then I started realizing that there was a chat capacity to it. And, you know, we were on Facebook or whatever, but here was something that was happening in real time. It was real conversations happening, not delayed, not anything. It was right there. And people, I could just, Questlove, I love you, oh my God, you know? And he might reply and be like, you're cool. And then you like, now you could favorite it and be like, see, you put it on Instagram, so look, he said he liked it. But back then, it was really a game changer, but I was still blogging. I was still writing. And I wanted people to read what I was writing. So I started sharing it on Twitter. And the more I shared, the more other people could use that retweet function. And I'm going to tell you a little something about the retweet function. I'm going to write about this in my upcoming book, so I'm not going to say too much now. But Twitter, it was made for Black women. Why do I say that? Twitter was made for Black women. Twitter is nothing but call and response. If you really think about it. If you think about the African tradition, particularly among Black women of the diaspora, of call and response, they're doing it now. As I'm talking, Black women are doing it now. Yep. That's how we are. That is our natural communication style. You see it in our churches. You see it in our schools. You see it in everywhere we go, our salons. That is how we talk. So Twitter was really created, you know, in this way that, you know, unintentionally prioritized Black women, you know, discourse and how we naturally communicate. So of course we dominate it. Of course we run it. This is second nature to us, right? So we got on there and we began sharing our work. And what I started to see was it was Black women creators, artists, writers, poets, you know, filmmakers were coming on here and now getting this exposure to their art that they'd never had before, and people were able to consume it. I was like, I want in. I want people to read. And then I was like, but wait, people are reading, so what am I going to do with this? And then I realized that I was building a platform and people were listening to me, and I said, I'm going to talk about sex. Yes, that's it, sex. Because sex is fun, and I've always wanted to talk about sex, and that's what I did. However, it was an approach to discussing feminism. It became sex-positive feminism. And why did I choose sex-positive feminism? Because it's one of the whitest things I'd ever encountered in my life. And I got to be at that table. I'm not leaning in, I'm shaking it, okay? I was like, well, all the Black women I know like to have sex. Why is it only the white women that are talking about how empowered they are by sex? Well, what are we talking about Black sexuality in the academy? I'm looking. Not seeing a whole lot. Not at least that's representative of what I experience as sexuality. Because Black academics still have a fear of talking about Black sex, and I get it. I get why it exists. But I said, you know what? Here's my entryway. So I started Knob-Slobbing Feminism. Yes, I did, and I changed it right before I appeared on MSNBC because ancestors intervened. However, I don't regret creating Knob-Slobbing feminism. It was tongue-in-cheek. It was meant to be provocative. It was meant to get people to be like, whoa, what? Let me click it and see. And when they would click it, they would click my blog. They would come and read like articles and discussions about women's empowerment through sexuality and sexual liberation, particularly centering Black women, who for centuries have had that power stripped by everyone, not just whiteness, men as well. And so I was like, here's a way that I could come in to this particular area and make a name for myself. And I started thinking about what it would take to make a name for myself, because that's where social media was going, branding. They all started talking about branding. So I needed a name, Feminista Jones. I needed imagery, everything is purple. People know, they associate Feminista Jones with purple. That's like ingrained in people's heads, to the point where I go and speak places now, the decor will be purple to welcome me, right? I started challenging people to think differently about their conversations about sex, way ahead of what you see right now. A lot of the stuff that I see now, I wrote about in 2013, 2014. I wrote about this long ago. But I'm glad to see people catching it on, because when I was doing it, it wasn't popular. And I was being rejected by a lot of the people I would consider peers right now. They were scared of it. Well, that's not what we want feminism to look like. But it was important. And why did white women get to do it and I couldn't? So I kept doing it. Started talking about things like BDSM and kink and our involvement in that. Felt like I needed to open those doors for those conversations because I felt it was empowering. And a lot of people still reject the idea of women finding empowerment through sexuality. But I need people to think about why that is, right? Because sex is a product that men want to control. So when women take control of it, what do they lose? They lose so much. And we're seeing this now with this whole sexual harassment thing. So what ended up happening was I became popular or whatever, and I decided that, well, I'm gonna move away a little bit from this, and I'm gonna go back to my activism, not go back to it, but I'm gonna bring more of the work that I've been doing as a social worker, as a community organizer, and I'm gonna bring it to social media spaces. 2014 was a major year for that. As she mentioned when she introduced me, it started with You OK Sis, and You OK Sis came out of an interaction that I had walking down the street. I'd written a few pieces on street harassment already. I had some guest writers, but never anything like as serious as this. And I experienced a situation where there was street harassment happening, and I intervened, not to go at the harasser, but to show the victim support. And I used the phrase, You OK Sis, and I told this story on Twitter after it happened. And then 2 people responded, because I said, can we make this a movement? Can we do something? Can you all commit this summer just to asking people if they're okay when you see them doing this? And then 2 people responded with 2 different hashtags. One was You OK Sis, OKAY, and one was OK. And I was like, yes, let's do this. Let's make this a movement. And I think origin stories are important because we put a lot of, focus on who created a hashtag, and that's, I think that people, the first time they use it, should be credited. It's also about what people do with it and who popularized the ideas. Like a hashtag can be thrown on anything, but we also have to remember that the ideas are also important. We look at Solidarity is for White Women. That is a hashtag created by Mickey Kendall, but she was long talking about this idea of solidarity being among white feminists before that. So even before the hashtag, she'd already started that conversation. So we need to credit that. And so with You OK Sis, it turns into centering women of color and our experiences with street harassment. Why? Again, another movement of feminism that was very white. And I found myself constantly encountering this as a woman who wanted to be a feminist and included in a movement, found there was so much whiteness there. How can I use social media to basically Blackanize it? That's what I was looking to do. Every movement you got, white women, Sharon, Janice, Carol, we're all gonna come and we're gonna remind you that we exist too. And so You OK Sis really became about that. It also became a hashtag that people could use as an alert system. So if you read a story about some kind of stalker man, flashing women, you could retweet it with You OK Sis, and that would let people know. It was also a support system. A woman could go and say, I just got followed down the street for 3 blocks. I'm really shaken up. And you'll see somebody respond and say, are you okay, sis? How are you doing? Do you need to talk about it? It's been going 3 years strong, okay? And it's evolved into talking not just about street harassment, but the violence against women of color, particularly black women, these stories that go untold, that no one seems to care about except for us. And so it's become an amplification, system as well. Of course, there was backlash. We'll talk about that later. I also created the National Moment of Silence. And here's where I am not going to be bitter. Whew. If we're going to talk about the movement for Black lives, we have to talk about the erasure of the National Moment of Silence. I feel like the work was done, and it was necessary, and it was, to date, still the single largest demonstration in the movement for Black lives in the last 5 years. Why was it that? Well, we had over 119 demonstrations in over 42 states and 5 countries that happened simultaneously. Can you think of anything else in the last 5 years that was like that? Over 100 articles written about it around the world. It doesn't get mentioned a lot when people talk about Ferguson and things like that. Michael Brown was killed on August 9th, right, 2014. The National Moment of Silence happened August 14th, 2014. So that means in a span of 5 days, I was able to use social media to galvanize over 100,000 people in 42 states and 119 demonstrations in 5 countries to come together at the same time to protest police brutality. And no one talks about it. And from that movement, since DeRay was mentioned, he says to me all the time, I got involved in this because I went to a National Moment of Silence vigil. Leslie McFadden, who started Safety Pin Box, started with the one in Philadelphia that she organized. A lot of people that you see now that are working as activists online got their start with the National Moment of Silence, or that became a point for them that really propelled them into the public space. And yet we don't talk about it. It's okay though, because I know the work was done. And I know that what came out of it was the creation of a new way of organizing, that people felt empowered. People, anybody, any one of you sitting in these seats could go to Facebook and create an event and share it with your networks and say, let's meet here for this purpose. And you can go on Twitter and you can share the link to your Facebook event. And you can get thousands of people, and if the right person retweets it, you've got hundreds of thousands of people who will know about your event. And if 1/10 of them show up, you've done something. That model came from several spaces, but for most of us in this movement for Black lives came from the National Moment of Silence. Poor girl from the Bronx changes the way we do activism, right? And I think that that's important to note because again, we talk about origin stories and erasure and how we collect this information online and what we do with it and how we retell these narratives. We just have to think about the humanity and the work that went in there. 80% of the people that organized the vigils had no prior organizing experience. They just wanted to do something, right? And so they joined. All I said was, anybody want to do this? Anybody in Atlanta, anybody in Detroit, anybody here, anybody here? And people answered the call. And we use social media to do that, right? That's changing the world in 5 days, right? The Women's Freedom Conference, 2015, I worked with friends of mine, and we said, first we were going to do a march, right? We were going to do a women's march. Then we realized that accessibility is an issue. Not everybody can afford several $100s for a conference ticket. Not everybody can leave their children at home to attend a conference or afford to bring their children with them. Not everybody can afford the travel fees. Not everybody's in America. So we decided that we were going to create an all-digital conference that lasted 12 hours that featured women from 5 continents who were talking about the work that they were doing in their own spaces. It took us a year to put it together. It was the first of its kind. Now, everyone's doing digital conferences. But ours was totally by and for women of color. And you can go to womensfreedomconference.com. It's all still there, all free. We didn't charge anything. Translated into 4 languages, every single video. Accessibility, modeling, breaking molds. Social media allows us to do that. But with all of that comes backlash. Hotep Twitter, who's heard of that? Hotep Twitter. Who came up with Hotep Twitter? Does anybody know who came up with that name? Me. I was the first person to hashtag that. I was the first person to talk about that years ago. See, again, we talk about the erasure of black women. Whew. Me, I ran off a whole list of jokes about Hotep Twitter way back in the day, and it caught on like wildfire. And now any reference to a misogynistic, ignorant fool who believes that all black people were kings and queens and there were no servants or peasants or anything at all, everybody who believes that they are descendants of Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey, everybody who wears the red, black, and green and only sleeps with white women is now called Hotep Twitter. Or the Ashies, as Kashawn Thompson, the creator of Black Girls Are Magic, would call them, Ashy Larrys. They call them Ashy Larrys, which has been truncated to Ashies. Again, these origin stories and these narratives have to be told, right? Because it becomes part of the lore, it becomes part of the oral tradition. What do? They hate black feminists. I swear they wake up, they pour a box of off-brand cereal, they put water on it, they get their big wooden spoon, and they dive into their hatred of black feminists. My goodness. Before they even feed their children, they are logging on to tell a black feminist how much they hate her. Whether it's me, whether it's Jamila, doesn't matter who it is, they hate us. Because we believe that black womanhood matters. And in their eyes, it's just about blackness. It's not about women, it's not about men. And the CIA has hired us. Well, they can't figure out if it's the CIA or the FBI. They don't know. We're just agents. We've been hired to destroy the black community. That's what so as you pay me today, you're paying me to destroy the black community according to them. And the backlash has done nothing but prove the need for black feminism and black feminist thought and activism. They call us every kind of name, make every kind of threat, make videos. If you go to YouTube and look up my name, you'll find 10 to 20 times more videos about me than my own videos. All from men who talk about how I either need to die, I need to be taken out, I need to be executed, I need to get some good dick, whatever it is they want to say. I'm an agent that needs to be taken out. I've had calls on my life, death threats, rape threats, all that, from black men, right? You would think they would leave that to white men, but no, it's coming from them. Because we want to fight for the rights of black women. And we are using social media to do it. We finally have voices, right? What do these voices look like? They are diverse voices. You have disabled black women, queer black women, older black women of all shades, black women from all different countries, black women who are poor, black women who are wealthy. You have black women are now getting the space to talk about our experiences, and we're doing so publicly. And what that's doing is creating a fear of being under a microscope. Because when you say something like black women have the highest fatal domestic violence rate in the country, and over 91% of black women murdered are murdered by people they know or intimate partners, and those partners are what race? Black. What does that say? It becomes an indictment on black men and black masculinity. And so they are doing everything they can to shut us up. And what does that look like on social media? It looks like stalking. It looks like harassment. It looks like videos calling for people to attack us. It looks like us coming to spaces like this and then later seeing a photo posted saying, I saw you, I was there, right? It looks like people talking about your children and making threats about your children. It looks like anything to silence you and to keep you away from it. And we keep going. We keep going, right? Because you cannot talk about Black liberation without talking about Black womanhood. And social media, Twitter particularly, has given us the space to do that because it is a call and response thing that is inherent to our communication. So what do you see? You see us connecting with ourselves, right? You see Black women connecting and building with ourselves. No, we don't all get along, and we don't all have the same way of thinking. But our circles are strong, okay? Some of the women that you will follow that are like, you know, prominent Black feminist voices, these are my home girls. These are like women that I would ride or die for, women that I have drinks with, women whose kids I would watch. We rock together because we all we got. And so what I started to do was think about how many of these kinds of collectives exist in other countries. What's happening in France? What's happening in the UK? What's happening in South Africa? And I started realizing that there's Black feminist work being done in all parts of the diaspora. So I started traveling. And it started building through social media, connecting with women who welcomed me into their homes when they heard I was coming there. I went to Paris. They arranged a whole lunch for me to welcome me into their Black feminist space. That's where that power is in social media. And kind of being famous, right? Because they wouldn't do that just for anybody, right? So I think that that's a perk, and it's kind of, it makes, I mean, getting to meet amazing Black women will always make everything worth it to me. But some days it's hard, and some days sisterhood is all we got, you know. But we keep pushing on. In terms of my career, like, it's been great. I'm not gonna lie. You know, the little girl that wanted to be a writer, as she read some of my bylines, all the great publications, I've had my writing there, I've had exposure there. Things that I never thought, I didn't want to be a journalist, never at all. I don't consider myself a journalist now. But I'm a writer who gets to be featured in these various publications, and people get to read it, and now people use my work in colleges, in high schools. In grad school, I went and took a class, and I opened up the syllabus. My article was there. And I didn't tell the teacher who I was until right before that. It was one of the highlights of my life. It's a dream come true for a poor girl from the hood to be in grad school and have her own thing on the syllabus under the name she chose for herself, right? I just signed a book deal, right? Yay. But it's gonna be my third book, because I published my first one myself, and I just released another one. You should go buy it. But would I have been able to publish and release and get access, you know, to sell that book without social media? Probably not. You don't sell thousands of copies of a self-published debut novel without something like social media. You don't sell it in over 10 countries without having that connection. So there's power there, right? Imagine what stories we could tell and where they could go, right? I wrote for the Washington Post about Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill. I know we just heard about it. I was wondering if it was that article that they were talking about. I said, no, she shouldn't be on the $20 bill. You kidding me? How are you putting currency on currency? That doesn't even make sense. You know, Harriet Tubman died an impoverished veteran who never got benefits. Now you want to put her in your pocket and use her to pay for things. Didn't she already go through that? But I didn't expect everybody to agree with it, but it created a discourse where people were coming to me, these white feminists who were just like, yes, Harriet, yes! Susan was all about Harriet being on the $20 bill, and then she read my article and came and said, wow, I didn't even think about that. So that's what we do with social media, right? We have the power now to get people to think differently, think outside their own boxes, change the way that they think about things, have more conversations about these things, live outside of our bubbles, outside of things. And that's power. And Black women are leading this. We are. It's awesome. Now we're going to Patreon. Because maybe writing for the Washington Post isn't the greatest thing right now. No shade if any of you, because I'm live streaming this, if any Washington Post editors, no shade. And then I got to write about hip hop and get paid for it. Like, I'm from the Bronx. I was raised on hip hop. I am a daughter of hip hop culture, and now I get paid to write about it. You want to talk about a dream? All because I learned that branding yourself as an expert, grinding, right, which means writing about music for a year for free, nobody really noticing, or writing about sex and sexuality for 2 years before anybody noticed, and then you get your own column in Ebony magazine. It's about the grinding, it's about the work, but look at the exposure that you get from the social media. And for a Black person, and for a Black woman, and for a woman, these are barriers, the barriers that we faced before social media would not make this happen. So our presence on Twitter is disruptive in that it levels the playing field a lot. It's not perfect, trust me, but it's way better than it's ever been. And we're capitalizing on it. And people are listening, and the more they listen, the more they have to think differently. They're forced to think differently. And they're still making some stupid ass mistakes, let's be real. Like, Lena Dunham still exists. I'm just saying. That girl needs an intervention. Like, I kind of want to take her out for like coffee and be like, what is your problem? Because she follows me too, so I know she reads all the shit I talk about her. I think if I'm thinking about recommendations for this, right, because this is academic thing, you're supposed to make recommendations. We have so much power that we are almost about to lose because we can't get out of our own way, because we want to be mean. We want to be trendy. We want to be catchy. We want retweets. We want to be slick. We want to be seen as things. We want to build entire careers around dragging people. We want to sell the art of the insult. We want to sell shade. And I'm not saying that there's no room for entertainment and humor. Of course there is. But when you really think of the times that we're in right now, like, it's 2017. That was cool in 2012 when it was fun, it was bullshit, we weren't really doing much. But now, when like fascism is like a real thing and economic collapse is a pending thing, we have to really start thinking about how we can harness this power and use social media and these digital spaces for coalition building, for empowerment, for education. A lot of people now are talking about how the creation of knowledge happens and how it's shared and how we are the creators of knowledge and we are the new teachers and we are the new educators. And you think about all the people that don't have access to institutions like this, who would never be able to sit with any of these professors and doctors here and these researchers here, would never be able to sit in a class with them, but can learn what they're teaching. It's shifting, it's changing, and there's power, right? They used to always say back in the 90s, it was knowledge is power. No, it really is. And we're changing all of that. Regular, schmegular, everyday people are able to come and contribute to this knowledge base that we're like developing and this database that we're getting of real life and experiences. We need to be able to be open to increasing our knowledge of other people's experience. American exceptionalism is one of the most discouraging things. We're so whack compared to others. I'm gonna keep it 100. Because I've been to other places, and I'm like, this is how y'all do feminism? You need to come and teach us something. You know what I'm saying? This is how y'all do revolution? Because we don't know nothing about that. We're not willing to give up our smartphones to be free. You know what I'm saying? Like, we could learn a lot from the experiences of others. And I think it helps, we have to think about changing the way we do the so-called work. Everybody talks about the work and the work and the work and the work. Thinking differently about how we do this liberation work as Black people, hypervisible people, people of color, women in these spaces it's changed. It's not, like they say, it's not your grandma's revolution, it's not your grandma's feminism, it's not your grandma's whatever. But they laid the foundation for everything that we do right now, so we can't act like we're brand new. But what we can do is take what we've learned and adapt it to this technology and this evolution and spread it and grow it and turn it into something so powerful that it knocks down every structure that's kept people imprisoned and, you know, oppressed for all this time. And I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to tiptoe towards the starting line of that. You know, this summer of resistance. Oh, white people, you're so cute. It's your resistance summer, so cute. I love it. I love it because it shows that you're capable of it. Can you keep it up is the question, because we've been keeping it up for centuries. Now you're on board. How much longer can you endure it? One summer is not going to get it. Hundreds of years we've been doing this, right? So we see that, though. At least we see the willingness. At least we see the opportunity. At least we have the tools. At least, you know, at least we have the access, and we're seeing that happen. And so it's like one thing to be hypervisible and to know that because of that, everybody's going to attack you all the time. They're going to say mean things. People are going to try to be shady. They're going to try whatever it is. They're going to just dislike you because other people like you, whatever it is. But it's also important to remember that because the reason that happens is because you've gotten into a space where you can bring people together. You can build communities. You can build movements. You can build that. And what do you do with that? And that's why I try to tell all these folks that are out here calling themselves activists, calling themselves activists and all of this stuff like that. What are you really doing? Your hashtag is cool. What are you doing? Right? Real talk. What are you doing? Who are you reaching? You have a hashtag on a app that most people don't use. So what are you doing beyond that? You can start a conversation here, but you have to take it to the people who will never access this. And a lot of times we forget that, right? Does anybody have any questions? Because I don't know how to end any of these things ever. So that's the end. And if you have questions, let me know. You might not. It's okay if you don't.
Hi.
Hi.
You talked about, when you were talking about backlash, you talked about this idea that there's kind of a delay between the things that you're talking about and kind of the things that people are talking about in the mainstream, and that it comes up. And you also touched on, like, particularly when you were talking about the moment of silence, how even though it's not something that's talked about regularly, it impacted a lot of people. Kind of keeping that in mind, do you think there's a way, do you think it's worthwhile to try and increase awareness of it? Do you think that will increase its significance, or do you think it's better just to try and move forward and do other, does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't have time to try to create awareness. We're only talking about Ella Baker now. Nobody was talking about her when she was doing the work that she was doing. Nobody gave a damn, but now we do. Now we hold her up to be this amazing person, but she was a very behind-the-scenes person, and her goal was to make leaders out of everybody, and I take that approach. So I have the same thing from it. 50 years from now, people will talk about the National Moment of Silence, and they'll remember, but that's okay, because right now is when the work that needs to be done. People are dying right now. So I could spend time, like, going on and on and on about that, like some people do. We'll spend 20 tweets about how you need to remember their hashtag. Or I can just have the back conversations with those folks who became organizers as a result and continue to mentor them, continue to work with them, and continue to build this work towards where we need to go. I mention it when I come and speak for things like this because I want you to go and research it so you can see what was done. You know, I think that that's important. But I'm not lamenting it in a way that it's like, woe is me. I don't care. It happened, and people exist now, and they're fighting now, and that's what happens. That's what matters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when I, peer over into the social media space and all these spaces, particularly with a younger cohort of Black women, I'm really impressed that we're at a moment where there seem to be Black young black women seem to have a real consciousness around gender, particularly around black womanhood, and to a point where I would say there are more black women doing feminism than who identify as feminists. And I was wondering sort of what are the impediments or the challenges, or even what's the potential, what's the capacity for doing your kind of work when it reminds me of the Black Women's Club movement where it was like, no, we do this stuff. We don't necessarily call ourselves feminists. We reclaimed a lot of black women as feminists, you know, after the fact, sort of almost posthumously. But I'm really impressed by like young black girls who are like, you know, have backlash to shows that they think that outdated black directors should not be doing on Netflix. You know, I'm really impressed by their conscience around these things, how they hold people to the fire.
I got it.
Right?
I figured out what you put down. Yes. Yes. In the age of wokeness, yes. And so I think there's the ups and downs of that. I think there's way more ups than there are downs. And so I think, you know, again, it's like access and accessibility, they don't have to what we did. I minored in women's studies. I got that. You know, I got to read those things that they never will, right? And so what do? I create a list. Here, go read this. A list of 25 books. If you want to be a black feminist, here's what you need to read. Because I read them, and I went through that. So you don't have to go through that, but here you go. And it's important for someone like me who had that access to be able to be like, here you go. But I do that because your social media feminism is not enough. Listening to Feminista Jones is not enough. I'm great, I write a lot, yes, but I'm not enough because it came from somewhere else. You have to know the theory. You have to know where it came from, how it came about. You gotta read, like, you gotta go back. You gotta go read Amy Garvey from 1925. You have to read Mimi Abramovitz, you have to read all these people that have been talking about all the aspects of feminism and what it's like to be a woman. And you need to know the theory. You need to know what, you know, victimology. You need to know radfem versus this and this. You need to know these things and what you consume on social media. So we've got these microwave, like 140, I call it the 140 generation. It's like, you want your theory in 140 characters or less. So what did we do? Black women created the thread, right? Again, call and response. I'm gonna respond to my damn self, and now everybody's gonna do it. We did that, right? Forthcoming book, writing about it. But it's like, I try to tell younger folks, I'm like, I love your questions. I love that you want to question everything. You have to, because you have to hold people accountable. But if you're going to go that far, I don't want you looking like a fool because you ain't got nothing to back it up. Like, if you're going to critique Spike Lee, which I've been doing, he's my favorite director, and I still critique him because he doesn't know what to do with black women. I want you to be able to come and write your essay and critique his lens of black women, and I want you to have the work, the theory to substantiate it and where it's coming from. So you can do both, because you can see me talking about, what the hell are you doing, Spike? Like, and I can have my multisyllabic words and my 23 thread, but you don't know where I'm bringing this from. I want you to know that, because I want you to be smarter than me. You know, and I'm not holding on to knowledge like that, thinking that I'm the almighty person that you need. No, I want you to have it. And unfortunately, there are some that are not willing to do that. There's some for whom even the language of those books is a little inaccessible. So I think that's also why I write, because I try to, you know, I use Black English vernacular whenever I can. I try to make it more accessible. But I think what's promising is that they care enough to question. I love the show Martin. Martin was one of my favorite shows growing up. And I see young people talking so bad about it, and I'm like, I know what you mean, but damn, that was my show. I know it was colorist. I know that there was all these issues going on, but damn, that show was funny. But it's like, I need to be challenged in that way, and it's young people that's doing it. But if you're gonna challenge me, I want you to bring it so that you're standing rooted in it. And I think that that's a responsibility that we have, is to not keep this locked in the academy, but to be able to say, okay, I know this foundation, how can I make this accessible to those who will never sit in these seats? Because what they're saying, they're on the right track. Intuitively, they're on the right track. They didn't, without even going to any of the classes or reading the articles, they are on the right track. So how do I strengthen where they're going with that, and how can I be a mentor in that space? So I think that's kind of what I see in exchange happening on social media. I see a lot of that between like Gen X and millennials. I see a lot of that. And I think it's promising, it's great. I have a few young women that I mentor myself, so yeah, I think it's great.
I'm so glad that I was able to hear you. You're the reason why I came today.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Oh, that's so
absolutely.
nice. Thank
And
you.
you mentioned Lena Dunham and looking at the political backdrop of the white woman's vote and how that has propelled us politically to where we are
I got to
today.
speak into the mic a little bit.
And how the white woman's vote at the last presidential election has propelled us to where we are today.
Right.
How do you envision a bridge? Because I think there's a vast distrust between African American women and Caucasian women. And
Yeah.
when you talk about history going back to
Right.
the slave and your husband going to the, I mean, there's a lot of discourse and distrust there. So we just love any further dialogue from you on that.
Yeah, I'm not building no bridge. The bridge has been my back. It's been my back for centuries. No, I'm not building a bridge. Lena's smarter than that. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's choosing to be this obtuse, right? So this is why I say that I'm a black feminist. Because I could say I'm a feminist, but I want to remind you that I am black as, like, you're going to see it in everything. You know, I'm going to be like, listen, Carol, I know we're standing woman and woman, but I am black, and your colorblindness it's offensive. And so I feel like in the assertion that I'm a black feminist, it's always a reminder that either you're going to talk about my black issues in these conversations or we're not going to talk at all. I'm not extending anything anymore, right? And I welcome the white women that come out. Listen, I got a whole army of righteous whitest women who are just like, they're down for the cause. And I love them to death because every day they're willing to say, I was wrong. I didn't know that. I'm learning this, and I'm trying to be better. And if you see me messing up, let me know, because I'm trying. And honestly, that's more than we've gotten in the last 100 years of all of us trying to do something for women in this country. So I'm not gonna push that away. But I'm also not like leaving my house to cook you dinner either. You see what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense? Like, I'm not going out of my way because there are going to be those who are, you know, making feminism a celebrity thing. And it's like, they haven't read either. I've got 19-year-olds who have read more about feminist theory than any of these white women who are being called feminists because they're celebrities or whatever, and they send a few tweets. They don't know feminist theory either. Emma Watson, girl, what do you know? what do you know? And I think that's a limitation. And what happens when, you know, social media comes and people think that they're getting all of their education from social media, it turns into that. And we see that happening with white women and this stuff. Lena, I think, so, okay, no, forget Lena. The election. I make some really unpopular comments about white women voting in the election, because I know it's really trendy to say, you know, 53% of white women, da-da-da-da-da. So I did a tweet where I showed the voting trends of white women over the last 4 presidents. Hasn't changed. So why now all of a sudden is an issue? You didn't care for the last 3 presidents. Wasn't a big deal. The trends have not changed. They are voting exactly as they have been. But now it's an issue. Why? Because maybe, are you worried because it was a white woman that was running? I'm like, so what happened in the last 4 presidents that you think would shift the way white women think about politics? Because there's a woman there? It's because we assume that women are going to be feminists. Feminists are a very small minority of women. And I think being on social media, we think that feminism is way more popular than it is. We still remain a small minority. So when we make these assumptions that white women are going to support white women under the name of feminism, I'm like, they ain't no feminists. They're not. So why are we making that assumption? Can we look at voter trends? People now are talking about, like, for Moore in Alabama, they're like, oh my God, like 6 out of 10 white women are still gonna vote for him. Why the hell wouldn't they? What reason do they have to not vote for him? People voted for Bill Clinton, knowing damn well what he did. They voted for Trump, knowing what he was accused. Why would they do anything different? And we're assuming that gender alliance or allegiance is going to change people's political, outlook, when have we seen a major shift in political views among any demographic in the last 60 years? It's not just white women. They're like, black women were 94% of black women voted. That's how we always vote. That's how we always vote. So this whole idea like black women are gonna save, no! We voted that way for Bill Clinton. we voted for John Kerry. We voted for Al Gore. We have always voted that way. Latinos and Asians, 29% voted for Trump. Look at the voting patterns for the last 3 presidents. It's the same. Nobody's changing. So why did we think that there was going to be some miracle because Hillary ran? But now all the discourse after that is like, oh, well, the white women, 53% of them. Yes, of course they did. What were they going to do different? You see what I'm saying? I could see if it was 60%, 65%. No, it's the same. In fact, I think it was like 54% for Bush. So why is our conversation stopping there? Why are we just looking for somewhere to place the blame and just lay it rather than look at the fact that we are in a capitalist economy that is corrupt and everybody here is oppressed? Even the oppressors are oppressed. Why don't we think about the fact that liberation is untenable as long as we subscribe to capitalism? Why don't we think about the Electoral College and the racist origins of that? Why don't we look at the things that are really getting in the way of us having a representative government that we need, instead of just wagging our fingers at 53% of white women? And a lot of people don't like to hear me say that, but it's the truth. If we're gonna have these real conversations, we need to check ourselves, because it's not getting us anywhere. Trump is still president, and we're finger pointing a year later. Electoral College is still what it is. Imagine if we took all that energy and focused it towards dismantling the Electoral College. We might get somewhere. Or the fact that apathy, political apathy in this country is disgusting. There's countries where 90+% of the people vote in every election because they value their vote. Can we get more than 50% of eligible Americans to vote just once? We might want to start there.